So, right now, artificial intelligence can invent, 1 million cures for cancer in a single afternoon.
Yeah, which is actually kind of the problem.
Exactly. I mean, imagine you have this massive, just impenetrable vault.
Right.
Right. And that's the disease you're trying to cure.
Right, and AI has basically just handed you a billion different keys.
Right. But you only have one keyhole. And it takes you 6 solid months to test a single key in that lock.
So generating the keys isn't the issue anymore.
No, not at all. Testing them is. And well, today's deep dive is about a company claiming they can completely shatter that bottleneck.
And in the process, basically build a monopoly over the entire future of human health.
It's a wildly ambitious premise, I mean, truly. We're looking at a roadmap today that challenges the foundational physics and the economics of the whole global pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, it's essentially an argument that the era of discovering drugs by trial and error is
Oh,
over.
right.
And this new era of engineering them with, absolute certainty is about to begin.
So for you listening, the source material we are unpacking today comes from a blog post and a really highly detailed series of embedded notes from an author named Paramendra Kumar Bhagat.
And this is dated today, actually, May 18, 2026.
Yeah, exactly. The document is titled Precigenetics, the Grand Solara Vision. And, I mean, the sheer audacity of this text is just staggering.
No, it really is. It's a 15-year master plan outlining a path to $1 trillion valuation.
$1 trillion. I mean, Precigenetics doesn't want to be just, another biotech startup launching a single drug.
No, they are aiming to become what they call the missing infrastructure layer of modern medicine.
Which is a really crucial distinction to make right at the top.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you're tuning in expecting this dense, impenetrable lecture on, molecular biology and protein folding, you can relax.
Thank goodness.
Right. This isn't just a story about wet labs and test tubes. It's about the violent convergence of AI, planetary scale compute power, and this fundamental, almost philosophical shift in how we view living cells.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because before we can even wrap our heads around a company aiming for $1 trillion,
Which is a number that basically loses all meaning if you say it too many times.
totally, but before we get there, we have to understand the specific multi-billion-dollar bottleneck they're claiming to solve.
Right. Going back to your lock and key analogy.
Exactly. The text explicitly states that biotech is no longer constrained by a lack of ideas. It is constrained by a lack of proof.
And that is the core paradox of modern medicine that the author really highlights here.
Right. Because we're living in an era where generative AI models can just spit out molecular drug candidates faster than the global scientific community could ever possibly validate them.
Yeah, the AI dreams up millions of chemical structures and potential interventions constantly.
But I mean, creating a molecule on a computer screen is just pixels.
Exactly, it's just digital.
To know if it actually cures the disease without killing the patient, you have to test it in the real world.
And the text claims Precigenetics sits exactly at this validation bottleneck.
They want to be the engine that proves which of those billion keys actually turns the lock.
And to solve that bottleneck, the text presents a massive paradigm shift in how we observe biology.
Yeah.
They describe it as moving from biology as snapshots to biology as movies.
Okay, that sounds great in theory, but let's break down the mechanics of that. I mean, what does a snapshot actually mean in today's labs?
Well, think about how a scientist looks at a cell today to understand what a drug is doing to it. Most of the time, biological observation is a destructive process.
Wait, destructive?
Yeah. To sequence a cell's RNA, to truly see what its genes are doing at a specific moment, you generally have to kill the cell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you freeze it, you dye it with toxic fluorescent chemicals, or you literally break it apart to read its contents. So you get a single frozen moment in time, a snapshot.
So it's kind of like trying to understand the rules of a football game by looking at a single photograph of a tackle.
That's a perfect way to conceptualize it, yeah.
Because you see two guys colliding, but you don't know who had the ball, you don't know what play was called, and you have like zero idea if it resulted in a touchdown or a fumble.
Exactly. Because living cells are complex, dynamic systems. They're constantly reacting to their environment, right?
Yeah.
Adapting, changing their internal state over hours and days.
So a snapshot tells you literally nothing about the trajectory.
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
And Precigenetics wants to make biology a continuously observed, computable system. They want to record the entire football game from start to finish.
They want to shoot the movie.
They want to shoot the movie, exactly.
And the camera they're using to shoot this movie is this central piece of proprietary technology mentioned throughout the source material. It's called Compass.
Right, compass.
The document describes it precisely as a photonic AI system that watches cells without touching them.
And without touching them is the absolute operative phrase there.
Like the observer effect in quantum physics.
Exactly like that. The act of observing something changes it. In biology, if you poke and prod a cell or inject it with dyes, you alter its natural behavior.
You introduce stress.
Right, you ruin the purity of the experiment.
So how does Compass get around that? I mean, the text mentions photonics. I'm assuming we're talking about light here.
We are. Photonics is the physical science of light generation and manipulation. So instead of using chemical dyes, Compass uses specific wavelengths of light.
Okay, so they shine light on it.
Yeah, they bounce this light off the living cells in a petri dish. And when light hits the complex structures inside a cell, like the nucleus, the mitochondria, the shifting proteins, it scatters.
It scatters in different directions.
Right, incredibly complex, high-dimensional patterns.
So it's essentially reading the physical distortion of light caused by the cell's internal machinery.
Yes, and a human eye couldn't possibly make sense of that scattered light. It just looks like noise to us.
But this is where the AI comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly. The AI is trained to understand the language of that light scatter. It continuously reads those subtle photonic shifts, second by second, hour by hour.
Capturing exactly how a cell reacts to a drug candidate in real time.
Exactly, without ever physically interfering with it.
Okay, but I have to push back here on behalf of the listener because this brings up a massive question.
Okay, sure.
I get the appeal of a continuous movie over a frozen snapshot. But if AI is already so incredibly advanced at generating these perfect drug molecules, I mean, we hear about AI drug discovery constantly. Why is this continuous validation such a roadblock?
It's a common question, yeah.
Because if the AI is smart enough to invent the perfect molecule, shouldn't testing it be just a mere formality? Why do we need the movie if the blueprint is already flawless?
Well, it's a very logical question, but it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of biology.
How so?
Because creating the candidate molecule is only step one. Human biology is not a static machine, it is an endlessly adaptive environment.
Meaning the lock changes shape while you're trying to put the key in.
Precisely. You can introduce a perfectly designed, theoretically flawless AI molecule into a petri dish. But if you can't observe the living, continuous cellular behavior to see how the cell reacts over time, you're blind.
Right.
Maybe the cell accepts the drug for the first 12 hours, but by day 2, it builds up a novel resistance mechanism.
Oh, wow.
Or maybe the drug cures the initial problem, but triggers a toxic secondary response on day 3 that causes the cell to self-destruct.
So if you just take a snapshot on day 1 and day 4, you are literally just guessing at what happened in the middle.
Exactly. You see a healthy cell on Monday and a dead cell on Friday, but you have zero idea that it was actually a cascading protein failure on Wednesday afternoon that killed it.
Right. And the text makes a really profound statement regarding this. It argues that the true AGI of medicine artificial general intelligence isn't just a chatbot sitting on a server generating novel molecular structures.
Yeah, that's just a really smart calculator.
Right. The real AGI, according to the document, is closed-loop biology.
Let's define that term. Closed-loop biology.
Meaning the system feeds back into itself automatically without human intervention.
Yes. It's an environment where experiments become continuous, autonomous learning cycles.
So you introduce the AI-generated drug to the cell.
Right, and the Compass photonic system watches the continuous movie of the cell's reaction.
And then the AI analyzes that movie in real time.
Exactly. It learns exactly why the molecule failed or succeeded on Wednesday afternoon, and then immediately designs a better experiment for Thursday.
It closes the loop. It iterates on physical reality, not just digital models.
Precisely.
So, okay, if Compass is the tool to watch this incredibly detailed, high-dimensional movie of a cell, how does a single startup scale this globally without going completely bankrupt?
It's a huge logistical challenge.
Right, because recording, storing, and analyzing high-definition photonic movies of millions of microscopic cellular reactions sounds like a computational nightmare.
It does.
And that brings us to their unique strategy regarding infrastructure. And I have to say, the text does not hold back on the corporate metaphors here.
It really doesn't. Precigenetics describes its ultimate form using a very specific three-pillared metaphor.
Right.
They explicitly state they want to be the AWS plus Google Maps plus the Bloomberg terminal of biology.
Okay, that is a dense combination of corporate titans.
Very dense.
Let's take those apart mechanically, because they aren't just buzzwords, right? They tell us everything about how this company actually plans to make money. First up, AWS, Amazon Web Services.
Right.
For those who aren't software developers, AWS is the reason almost every startup in the last 15 years could even exist. You don't build your own server farm in a basement anymore. You just rent scalable compute power from Amazon.
Correct. And when the text uses AWS as an analogy, they are talking about providing the scalable underlying infrastructure for biological validation.
So no more basements full of servers.
Exactly. Just as you don't buy physical servers today, a pharma company in the future wouldn't build massive, expensive internal validation wet labs.
They wouldn't buy their own Compass machines.
Right. They would simply send their AI-generated molecules to Precigenetics and rent the validation infrastructure on demand.
So it shifts pharma from a capital-heavy expenditure model to a nimble, cloud-like subscription model.
Exactly. It changes the whole economic structure.
Right. And then the second pillar, Google Maps. The text calls this navigation through cellular state space. Now, state space is a heavy mathematical concept. Let's translate that for the listener.
Sure. Think about the blank spaces on an old map. A cell isn't just a physical object with a single identity, It exists in a constantly shifting state.
Okay.
It could be in a state of healthy replication, a state of oxidative stress, a state of cancerous mutation, or a state of programmed cell death.
Let me try an analogy here. Think of cellular states like a massive, complex pinball machine.
Okay, I like this.
A healthy cell is the ball sitting quietly in the starting chute. A drug candidate is the plunger. Right now, a pharma company pulls the plunger, shoots the ball into the machine, and basically just waits to see if it hits the jackpot or falls down the drain. They can't see the flippers. They can't see the bumpers.
They're flying blind.
Exactly. Precigenetics is claiming they want to map every single bumper, flipper, and ramp in that machine. So the AI knows exactly where the ball will bounce and what state it will end up in before you even touch the plunger.
That is exactly what they mean by mapping cellular state space. Just like Google Maps calculates the millions of possible routes through a city to tell you the fastest way to avoid a traffic jam.
Right.
This system would calculate the millions of potential biological pathways to tell a researcher the exact trajectory a cell will take when exposed to a specific compound. It maps the biological traffic.
And the third pillar, the Bloomberg terminal.
Right.
For those outside of high finance, a Bloomberg terminal is that incredibly expensive multi-screen computer setup you see on Wall Street trading floors. It's not a newspaper you read the next day. It gives traders continuous, real-time, second-by-second signals for decision-making.
Exactly. Precigenetics wants to be that indispensable dashboard for the biological scientist.
So not a PDF report.
No. They aren't delivering a static PDF report at the end of a 6-month trial. They are delivering a continuous, real-time feed of biological signals.
You watch your molecule interacting with the cell live.
Yes, adjusting your hypotheses on the fly.
Man, if you are sitting in a pharmaceutical boardroom today, think about what this means. You aren't just looking at a new piece of lab hardware. You aren't buying software.
You're looking at subscribing to an entirely new, closed ecosystem of biological evidence.
You're renting their labs, you're using their maps to navigate, and your scientists are staring at their data terminals all day. But my monopoly alarm is ringing incredibly loud here. I mean, being the Bloomberg terminal of an industry implies creating a platform so sticky and so essential that an entire global industry literally cannot function without it.
It does imply that, yes.
Doesn't this mean they want to essentially own biological truth?
It's a very sharp observation. And what's fascinating is that the author of the text doesn't shy away from that implication at all.
Hooray!
Yeah, they don't try to dress it up in collaborative PR speak. In fact, the document literally states, whoever owns the evidence layer owns the future of medicine.
Wow. Owns the future of medicine. That is an aggressive zero-sum statement.
It's a declaration of a planned monopoly. But it's a monopoly based on an undeniable premise, which is the supremacy of validation.
Right, because if you provide the most accurate real-time evidence.
Exactly. If you provide the undeniable evidence of what drugs work and what drugs fail, everyone else's legacy data instantly becomes obsolete. You become the undisputed source of truth.
But owning the future of medicine capturing these continuous cellular movies via photonics, mapping every bumper on the biological pinball machine. That requires an unfathomable amount of data processing.
Unfathomable is the right word.
You cannot run a global closed-loop AI system on a couple of MacBooks.
Probably not.
To build this infrastructure, the text outlines a very specific, aggressive financial play. And this is where the business strategy gets just as fascinating as the science.
It really does. This is a critical pivot in the document. We move from the theoretical physics of the compass machine to the harsh reality of venture economics.
So what's the pitch?
The current fundraising pitch outlined in the text is for a $200 million round at a $1 billion valuation, specifically targeting the 2026 to 2027 period.
$1 billion valuation out of the gate is a unicorn round. It's massive.
It is.
But here's where it gets really interesting and frankly a bit baffling. The crucial detail in this pitch isn't just the sheer amount of money, it's what they plan to do with it on day one. The text explicitly states that $100 million of this raise, fully half of the entire venture capital injection, is immediately allocated as a down payment into a single external entity they call Himalayan Compute.
Which is, on the surface, a staggering capital allocation decision.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is how the author justifies it. They don't frame this $100 million as an operational expense or a massive line item cost for IT infrastructure. They frame it as a strategic weapon.
Wait, tying up $100 million in compute power immediately sounds like commercial suicide.
It sounds risky, yes.
If I'm an investor looking at this pitch deck, I'm thinking about Moore's Law. Compute gets cheaper and faster every single year. GPUs become more efficient.
True.
Why buy the cow today if the milk is going to be half price tomorrow? Why put half your massive raise into a single compute provider right out of the gate? There has to be a structural, physics-based reason they're locking this in now.
You're hitting on the exact friction point of the pitch, and the author answers it by explaining the sheer scale of the data.
Okay, lay it on me.
The Compass platform is not processing text or generating images. It is highly GPU intensive, because it is building high-dimensional trajectories.
Let's ELI5 that. What does high-dimensional mean here?
Well, if you track a cell's size and weight, that's 2 dimensions. Easy for a standard computer.
Right.
But Compass is tracking thousands of variables simultaneously from that light scatter. Protein folding rates, membrane tension, mitochondrial output, all changing second by second.
Wow.
That's thousands of dimensions of data for a single cell. Now multiply that by millions of cells running continuously.
That's a lot of data.
The sheer volume of processing required to train AI models on that is astronomical. It triggers something called Jevons paradox.
Jevons paradox.
Right.
Right. As a resource becomes more efficient or cheaper, we actually consume exponentially more of it rather than less.
Exactly. As AI models get better, they demand exponentially more compute to train the next generation of the model.
Ah, I see.
The text is very clear on this. Compute is the bottleneck. If they don't solve the compute problem permanently and aggressively right now, their whole vision collapses under its own data weight in 3 years.
They will have the best microscope in the world, but they won't be able to afford the electricity to turn it on.
Precisely.
The source material offers a brilliant historical business analogy for this move. It says, this is like Amazon buying electricity generation before building AWS.
It's the perfect parallel. Amazon realized early on that the limiting factor for data centers was the cost of power.
Right.
By making this massive $100 million down payment into Himalayan Compute, Precigenetics claims they are securing the cheapest, most abundant GPU compute in the world at a massive discount.
Effectively half price compared to market rates.
Exactly.
Ah, so that's the moat. The text says this single move transforms them from a promising platform company into one with effectively unlimited scale economics.
Let's use another analogy to bring it home. The text explicitly states, compute is the factory, and Precigenetics wants to be the Ford of biological evidence.
Like Henry Ford.
Right. Henry Ford didn't just design the Model T, he built the River Rouge complex.
Yeah, it was massive.
It was a factory so massive and integrated that it literally took in raw iron ore on one end and spit out finished cars on the other. He owned the means of production at every level.
So by buying the compute at a steep discount early, they create an insurmountable moat against any competitor.
Yes.
Because if a rival startup pops up in 3 years and tries to copy the Compass machine, they might be able to build the hardware, but when they go to run the closed-loop AI, they will have to pay full, fluctuating market price for their GPU processing.
Exactly. Precigenetics will be able to process 10 times the data for a fraction of the cost.
The competitor bleeds to death on compute costs before they even map their first cellular trajectory.
They wouldn't even stand a chance.
Okay, so you have the hardware, the Compass microscope,
Right.
and you have the compute power, the Himalayan factory.
Yeah.
You've laid the groundwork. But having the best validation engine in the world doesn't automatically mean Big Pharma will just hand over their billion-dollar proprietary molecules. I mean, pharma is a notoriously paranoid, slow-moving industry.
Very slow.
How do you actually break into that market? The document answers this by laying out an exact 15-year, 5-phase roadmap to reach that trillion-dollar valuation.
It's a very methodical escalation of trust and dependency. Phase 1 covers years 1 through 3. The goal here is titled Build the Evidence Machine.
Okay.
They are projecting a valuation of $5 billion to $15 billion, with a revenue target of $50 million to $150 million in annual recurring revenue, or ARR.
And the commercial strategy for this first phase is entirely focused on a concept they call de-risking as the wedge market.
Right, de-risking.
Let's contextualize that. In tech, a wedge is exactly what it sounds like, the sharp, narrow edge you use to crack open a massive log. You don't try to sell the whole grand vision of closed-loop biology on day one.
No, you find one bleeding neck problem, you solve it perfectly, and you get your foot in the door.
So why did they choose de-risking? Why not try to cure a rare disease right out of the gate?
Because curing a disease takes a decade of clinical trials and regulatory approval. De-risking solves an immediate existential financial crisis for pharmaceutical companies today.
How so?
Well, the text points out that pharma already knows that toxicity and late-stage failures are actively killing their business models.
Let's talk about the mechanics of a late-stage failure. You are a pharma executive. You spend 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars developing a drug in the lab.
Right.
It cures the disease in mice. You take it to human trials. You spend another $300 million, and suddenly, in phase 3 human trials, 5 patients develop severe liver failure.
It happens all the time.
The trial is halted. The drug is dead. You just burned $500 million and a decade of work.
It's a total catastrophe. And it happens constantly because, as we know, a mouse is not a human. And a static snapshot doesn't tell you the whole story.
Right.
So Precigenetics comes to that executive and says, give us your molecule right now in year 1. We will put it under the Compass photonic system, run our continuous cellular movies on human tissue models, and tell you right now, today, if it's going to cause liver failure in 3 years.
Wow.
The text calls this moving truth earlier.
Moving truth earlier. If you can save a pharma giant from burning $500 million on a doomed clinical trial, they will gladly write you a $10 million check for that early certainty.
Absolutely.
It's not even a science purchase at that point. It's just basic risk management. It's an insurance policy.
It's the easiest purchase decision for procurement to make. It gets the Compass machines integrated into their workflow. That gets their foot in the door.
Makes total sense.
And then once they're inside, we move to phase 2, which covers years 3 through 6. The text explicitly calls this the pharma lock-in era.
And the valuation target jumps here to between $30 billion and $80 billion, with revenues targeting $500 million to $1 billion ARR.
And this is where the strategic pivot happens. They shift from being a helpful, optional tool vendor to becoming a platform utility, or what the author boldly calls mandatory infrastructure.
Mandatory infrastructure. The document lays out specific product expansions for phase 2 that sound like science fiction, but they're treated as inevitable commercial next steps.
Yeah, like automated experiment loops.
Right, where the AI runs the hardware overnight.
Yeah.
Predictive phenotype modeling. And something called standardized cell cinema reports for regulators.
Yes.
They are targeting the top 30 pharma companies and the top 200 biotechs globally.
And if you work anywhere near regulatory compliance or the FDA, that phrase, cell cinema reports for regulators, should set off massive alarm bells.
Why is that?
They aren't just giving the data to the scientists in the lab. They are actively trying to change the fundamental format of the evidence that gets submitted to the government.
Oh, wow.
They want to replace static PDFs of clinical trial data with their proprietary continuous photonic movies.
But hold on, let's challenge this jump from phase 1 to phase 2. I understand selling an insurance policy against toxicity, but how do you force lock-in?
Right. How do you make it mandatory?
Exactly. If you are just providing early toxicity readouts, how do you suddenly become the default validation engine for global pharma? How do you force a company like Pfizer or Novartis to treat you as mandatory infrastructure?
The author explains a really fascinating psychological and economic shift that happens within these massive organizations.
Okay.
The text notes that pharma will pay almost anything to reduce late-stage failure risk. Once Precigenetics proves in phase 1 that their validation speed and accuracy are fundamentally superior to legacy methods.
Right, once they have saved a few billion-dollar catastrophes.
Exactly, a tipping point is reached.
So it's the fear of missing out, but at a corporate fiduciary level.
Exactly. Imagine Pfizer uses Precigenetics and successfully navigates a tricky drug to market without a toxicity failure. But Novartis decides to stick to the old methods to save money. And they suffer a massive phase 3 liver toxicity failure that tanks their stock price.
Oh, man.
Novartis's shareholders, their board of directors, are going to demand to know why the executive team wasn't using the industry standard for certainty.
So the lock-in happens because the cost of not using the platform becomes professionally and financially indefensible.
You literally get fired for not using Precigenetics.
Wow. Okay, so you've scared pharma into buying your tool, and their boards are demanding they use it. They are locked in.
Right.
But an insurance policy is essentially a defensive play. You are just preventing losses. How do you pivot from defense to a multi-hundred-billion-dollar offensive play?
That's the next phase.
How do you go from a safety check to the core engine of discovery? That natural evolution brings us to phase 3.
Phase 3 covers years 6 through 9. This is termed the living cell atlas era. The valuation target here becomes astronomical, between $150 billion to $300 billion, with an ARR of $3 billion to $8 billion.
And the core deliverable here is building the world's first living cell atlas. Now, we've mapped the human genome. We know what genes make up a human.
We do.
But the text makes a profound distinction here about what this atlas actually is. I want to make sure we highlight this because it's the conceptual core of the whole company.
Right.
It says this is a database not of cell identity, but of cell destiny.
And this really challenges how we classify biology today. Currently, an atlas of biology tells you what a cell is in the present moment.
Right, like it's a liver cell or a T cell.
Or a malignant melanoma cell. It's an identity. But Precigenetics says that's not enough. Identity is static. Their living cell atlas is designed to answer the question, where is this cell going?
The destiny of the cell.
Yes. Based on its current state and the continuous data gathered from millions of previous cellular movies run in phase 1 and 2, the AI can project the future trajectory of that specific cell under any condition.
Like, will it mutate? Will it turn malignant? Will it adapt to a specific stressor? Let's bring in an analogy to explain this shift from identity to destiny. Think about weather forecasting.
Oh, that's a good one.
100 years ago, forecasting the weather meant looking out the window and measuring the barometric pressure. That gives you the identity of the weather right now. It's cloudy.
Right.
Today, we feed millions of data points into supercomputers to run fluid dynamic simulations of the atmosphere. We don't just know it's cloudy today, we know with near certainty that the specific collision of air masses means it will rain in exactly 4 days at 3:00 p.m.
We know the destiny of the weather system.
Exactly.
That is precisely the Google Maps moment of biology the text refers to. Precigenetics is building the supercomputer simulation for the cellular weather.
And the atlas includes specific marketable features like a resistance trajectory library, a toxicity trajectory library, and predictive phenotype modeling.
Let's ELI5 phenotype really quickly, because that word gets thrown around a lot. A genotype is your genetic blueprint, the DNA code you were born with. A phenotype is how that code physically expresses itself in the real world, based on its environment.
So 2 identical twins have the same genotype. But if one smokes for 30 years and the other runs marathons, they will have very different physical phenotypes. Their bodies will express differently.
Exactly. And predictive phenotype modeling means the AI can look at a cell's current state, apply a hypothetical drug in a simulation, and tell you exactly how that cell will physically transform, how its phenotype will change over the next week.
Without ever actually running the physical experiment.
Without ever running it.
Let's make this incredibly tangible for you listening. Imagine you are dealing with a severe medical diagnosis in the year 2035.
Okay.
Imagine a healthcare system where an oncologist doesn't just look at a biopsy and say, this is what the tumor looks like right now. Let's try chemotherapy A and see if it shrinks.
Right, the current method.
Imagine they pull up the living cell atlas, run a simulation, and say, based on the trajectory models, if we give you drug A, this specific tumor cell's destiny is to build a resistance within 14 days and come back stronger.
Wow.
But if we give you drug B, its destiny is to undergo rapid cell death in 48 hours. They are predicting the future of your specific cells before you ever swallow a pill.
It completely eliminates trial and error from clinical care. And the business mechanics underlying this atlas are brutal for any competitor trying to catch up.
Right.
The text describes a platform flywheel.
In venture capital, everyone loves a flywheel. How does this specific biological flywheel work?
It's a classic compounding loop, and it's accelerated by that cheap Himalayan compute they locked in on day one.
Okay, lay out the loop.
Here it is. More pharma customers use the Precigenetics platform because it's the industry standard. That means more experiments are run through the Compass machines.
More experiments generate more cellular movies and trajectories.
Exactly. Those millions of trajectories feed back into the living cell atlas, making the AI models vastly more accurate.
And those superior, hyper-accurate models attract even more customers who demand the best data.
The text calls it a compounding data monopoly. Every single time a competitor tries to launch a rival platform, Precigenetics has already ingested a million more cellular movies.
Their map is always more precise.
The competitor can never catch up because they just don't have the data scale.
But a map, no matter how detailed or predictive, is ultimately only good if you use it to drive somewhere. And in the final 2 phases of this 15-year roadmap, Precigenetics outlines their plan to stop being the navigator and take the steering wheel entirely.
Which brings us to phases 4 and 5, which the document explicitly titles the trillion-dollar endgame.
In phase 4, which spans years 9 to 12, Precigenetics ceases to be just a measurement or validation platform. The valuation target leaps to between $400 billion and $700 billion.
Massive leap.
The stated goal here is that closed-loop biology becomes standard. They intend to become the operating system of drug development.
So they aren't just the math anymore, they are the autonomous vehicle.
Right.
The text lists new capabilities for this phase. Autonomous experiment planning, adaptive therapy simulation, AI-designed perturbations that are validated instantly.
Basically, the human scientist is stepping back.
Yeah, the pharma company just inputs the disease they want to cure, and the Precigenetics operating system runs the entire discovery, generation, and validation cycle on its own, inside its own massive data centers.
It is the full automation of the scientific method. And then we reach phase 5. Years 12 to 15, the trillion-dollar infrastructure layer, valuation target, $1 trillion plus.
And here is the line in the text that actually made me stop reading and just stare at the wall for a full minute.
Oh, I know the one.
The goal for phase 5 is to become the FDA before the FDA for biological truth.
It's a breathtaking assertion of power. The text claims that by year 15, they will own the largest living data set ever assembled, the dominant cellular trajectory models, the undisputed validation workflow standard, and the biological evidence API layer.
And the expansion markets they list to justify a trillion-dollar valuation are massive. They aren't just looking at standard pharma pills anymore.
No, they list cancer treatment prediction, longevity interventions, autoimmune disease modeling, neurodegenerative progression mapping, infectious disease adaptation.
They want their models to touch every single aspect of human health, aging, and disease.
The culminating claim is that, at this point, because of their absolute certainty in prediction, medicine becomes engineering.
It is no longer an art or a guessing game. It is math.
Okay, but let's take a breath and challenge the sheer audacity of this Phase 5 vision. Becoming the FDA before the FDA implies they want to be a quasi-regulatory body.
It does.
They want their software output to be the de facto arbiter of biological truth for the entire planet. Is that even remotely possible for a private for-profit company? Regulatory bodies are government entities for a reason. You can't just declare yourself the FDA.
Well, if we ground this in the internal logic of the text, the author argues that the industry and the government simply won't have a choice. Yeah, it's not about legal regulatory capture. They aren't bribing politicians to change the law. It's about epistemic capture, capturing the truth.
Wait, so they don't lobby the government to become the regulator? They just make their data so undeniably good that the government looks stupid or negligent if they don't use it?
Precisely. Imagine the FDA is still relying on static paper reports, legacy clinical trials, and 12-month observation windows.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Precigenetics has a continuous planetary-scale real-time database of cellular destiny with a 99.9% predictive accuracy rate. If you are a regulator, whose data are you going to trust to ensure public safety?
Ah, so they are saying their evidence will be so overwhelmingly superior that regulators will voluntarily adopt their standard or risk approving dangerous drugs that Precigenetics AI already knows will cause heart failure in 3 years.
Yes, they become the mandatory gateway.
Yeah.
A pharma company wouldn't even bother submitting a drug to the actual FDA until the Precigenetics OS has already simulated it, run the movies, and proven mathematically that the drug works.
The FDA just rubber stamps the Precigenetics output.
Exactly.
Now, a vision this massive, a 15-year roadmap that explicitly aims to rewrite the infrastructure of global medicine, establish a compounding data monopoly, and usurp government regulators, requires a very specific type of capital.
Definitely.
Traditional Silicon Valley money, your standard series of venture capitalists who want a quick software flip in 3 years, might balk at the scale, the hardware costs, or the timeline of this ambition.
They absolutely would.
Which leads us to the highly targeted geopolitical fundraising strategy outlined in the document.
This is where the document shifts from a tech pitch to a geopolitical manifesto. The text makes it abundantly clear that they're looking entirely beyond traditional venture capital.
Right.
The fundraising narrative is heavily specifically tailored toward the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund.
A sovereign wealth fund is essentially a state-owned investment fund. It's a country investing its surplus cash, usually from oil or natural resources, into global assets to secure its financial future. The author literally calls this deal a strategic steal for the UAE. We need to look closely at this geopolitical angle. Why bypass Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley and pitch a biological infrastructure layer to a Middle Eastern nation-state?
Well, the author states explicitly in the text and in several embedded social media posts that Precigenetics needs mega customers and UAE sovereign wealth funds, not what he dismissively calls unimaginative VCs.
Unimaginative VCs.
Right. A traditional VC wants a 10x return. A sovereign wealth fund wants to secure the next century of national prosperity.
Right. Let me bring in some of the specific context from the document. If you look at the embedded tweets in the source material, the author is directly tagging officials and entities on X.
Who are they tagging?
We see tags for Mubadala, ADQ, ICD Dubai. These are massive, multi-hundred-billion-dollar sovereign wealth vehicles. He's also tagging the UAE ambassador in Delhi and top leadership in the Emirates.
So this isn't a passive PDF sitting in an inbox. This is a public, diplomatic, and financial lobbying effort.
And the benefits pitched to the UAE are framed not just as financial returns on a $200 million investment, but as civilization-scale strategic assets.
The text promises ownership in the foundational layer of the next trillion-dollar healthcare economy.
It dangles the potential to create a global hub called the Dubai of medicine.
And what does Dubai of medicine mean practically in the context of this tech?
It means achieving global leadership at the exact intersection of the three most important technologies of the 21st century: artificial intelligence, massive GPU compute power, and predictive biotech.
Right. The text explicitly mentions the UAE positioning itself as the neutral global capital of cancer prediction and longevity research.
Neutral is a very loaded word in today's political climate.
It is entirely intentional. In a world of increasing technological fracturing between East and West, between the U.S. and China over AI and chip dominance, establishing a geographically and politically neutral hub for the most advanced medical data on Earth is a massive geopolitical play.
So if the UAE owns the validation engine, both American pharma and Chinese biotechs have to route their data through the Emirates.
Exactly.
And the text drives this home by reminding the sovereign wealth investor of the ultimate stakes. Late-stage drug failures aren't just minor corporate accounting errors. The text calls them multi-billion-dollar catastrophes.
What Precigenetics is fundamentally selling to the UAE isn't just a software platform or a photonic microscope. They are selling certainty.
For a nation-state like the UAE, which is actively, aggressively looking to diversify its economy away from fossil fuels and transition into a future-proof knowledge economy, owning the infrastructure of certainty in global health is framed as an irresistible, century-defining asset.
The pitch is essentially buy the operating system of the human future before Wall Street even understands what is happening.
But this grand ambition, this trillion-dollar roadmap, the geopolitical maneuvering, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. If you scroll through the source material, this Precigenetics pitch is actually part of a much wider, almost dizzying ecosystem of ideas presented by the author.
And this is where the deep dive gets a little wild, and where I imagine a skeptical investor might raise an eyebrow.
The periphery of the document is certainly robust and highly unconventional. The text is heavily peppered with references to other books and sweeping philosophical concepts authored by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat.
Just looking at the sidebar and the embedded links within the text, we see titles for other works like Cell Cinema Revolution, Physical AWS, How the Logistics Cloud Will Reshape Global Commerce, Lumina AI, The Trillion-Dollar Sun.
And concepts like Kalkiism and the Age of Abundance.
The very first sentence of the entire document sets the sweeping tone immediately. It opens by stating, "The impending age of abundance was prophesied in the scriptures thousands of years ago."
It is an incredible juxtaposition. You have this deeply rigorous 15-year biotech infrastructure roadmap, complete with ARR targets, GPU compute economic theories, and FDA regulatory strategies, sitting right next to references to ancient scriptures and sci-fi novel titles like The Country of Geniuses, A Race Through AI Adolescence.
And the embedded social media posts only add to that deeply eclectic atmosphere.
They really do. You have tweets tagging foreign ministers regarding multi-billion-dollar national compute strategies, right next to a tweet where the author casually jokes about weighing 160 pounds and that being overkill for his frame.
Or another tweet comparing the Precigenetics genetic mission to a line from a Tom Cruise movie. Between my brother and I, we know everything.
It's a fascinating, unfiltered mosaic of communication styles. So, as a critical reader, how should we parse this? We have hard tech physics, sovereign wealth fund geopolitical strategies, and sweeping, almost mystical philosophy all blended together into a single pitch.
Does the eccentricity undermine the rigor of the 15-year roadmap? Or is this just a feature of the kind of visionary thinking required to imagine a trillion-dollar leap?
If we look closely at the history of technological breakthroughs, the personalities driving them are rarely conventional. But whether you view this presentation as profoundly visionary or highly eccentric, the physics and the math of the business model do not care.
The underlying thesis the author is presenting remains razor sharp.
Which is what, fundamentally?
That biology is inexorably becoming computable. It is shifting from wet lab chemistry to data science. And in any computable system, whoever controls the validation engine, whoever controls the mechanism that separates true signals from noise, reality from hallucination, controls the entire industry.
So the core economic argument holds weight regardless of the packaging. If you can predict a cell's destiny, you win.
Precisely. The peripheral material, the novels, the philosophies of an age of abundance, the colorful movie quotes, they just serve to underscore the author's absolute, unwavering belief that we are standing on the precipice of a civilization-level shift.
They do not see Precigenetics as an isolated, iterative business venture. They see it as one core pillar of a fundamentally transformed human future where disease is no longer a mystery.
Okay, let's pull all these complex threads together and synthesize the journey we've just been on.
Right. We started with the realization that AI is generating potential cures faster than we can test them, creating a massive validation bottleneck. A billion keys, one keyhole.
We explored the Compass photonic AI system, which promises to shift biology from frozen, destructive snapshots to continuous high-dimensional movies without ever touching the cell.
We examined the audacious financial strategy of immediately sinking half of a massive fundraising round into Himalayan Compute, treating processing power not as an IT cost, but as the fundamental factory of biological evidence to create an insurmountable moat.
And we walked through a meticulous 15-year roadmap, starting by offering simple toxicity de-risking as a wedge to terrified pharma companies, then forcing lock-in to become an industry standard.
Then building a living cell atlas to map cellular destiny, not just identity, all the way to phase 5, becoming the FDA before the FDA, a trillion-dollar infrastructure layer that treats human health as a predictable engineering problem.
All of this pitched directly to the sovereign wealth of the UAE to create a neutral global capital of medicine.
To boil it down to the author's exact 3-line investor closing argument from the text. 1. AI generates infinite candidates, making validation the ultimate bottleneck.
2. Precigenetics is the validation engine.
3. With Himalayan Compute locked in at a massive discount, it scales faster and cheaper than any competitor could ever hope to.
Therefore, a $200 million raise at a $1 billion valuation is, in their explicit words, mathematically underpriced.
It is a vision that forces you to completely reevaluate what is possible in the next decade of healthcare. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on this text but pushes the implications a step further into our daily lives.
Yeah.
If Precigenetics succeeds in this grand vision, if we truly transition to an era of closed-loop biology where human cellular destiny can be predicted, modeled, and altered like software code, and whereas the text boldly claims disease becomes optional, do our biological bodies essentially become just another edge device on a global compute network?
It's a profound, almost unsettling implication. We stop being mysterious biological organisms and become predictable data outputs.
Think about it. If the future of our health relies on the factory of continuous data processing and AI modeling, is the future of human longevity ultimately bounded not by our genetics, not by our diet, but by our access to affordable GPU compute?
Are we trading the terrifying dragons on the old, unmapped borders of biology for a complete, lifelong dependency on the server farm?
It changes the definition of healthcare entirely. You aren't going to the doctor, you are pinging the network for a patch update.
It really does. It's a brave new world, and it's coming faster than we think.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you on the next one.